Hey y'all, Miss R here with a video on paragraph organization. So I want to teach you a method of organizing your paragraphs that I have been using and teaching to students for about 6 years. And all of my students tend to find it really, really useful in having like a format of what goes into each body paragraph. So let me show you one thing first that I think we will find very clarifying. So in an essay, we know that it starts with an introduction, which has a thesis statement, which is like the main argument that's going to run throughout the whole paragraph, right? Throughout the whole essay. So you have that introduction thesis statement that states your purpose for the rest of the paper. Then you have the body, which is your body paragraphs that help to back up and support the argument that you're making. Okay, and then you have your conclusion, which is wrapping up the whole argument and bringing all your ideas together. That's what an essay does. A paragraph does the same exact thing. So you're going to start with that topic sentence or main idea, which acts kind of like an introduction or thesis statement to your paragraph. This is what I'm going to talk about throughout this whole paragraph. Okay, this is my main argument. Then you want to back it up with evidence and analysis. So using quotes or paraphrase to give examples of what you're talking about so that your reader can understand you. And finally, you want to have a kind of conclusion to wrap up that point that you were making and get ready to move on to the next one. So we call this a link or a transition. It could be the meal plan or the meat plan if you're not so veggie. Okay, so you want to close your paragraph with a concluding kind of idea, just like you're going to close an essay with that. Let me break this down for you a little bit more. So you start with your main idea. This is where you say the topic of your whole paragraph. You want to take out any kind of self or reader talk like this. I'm going to explain to you this paragraph is about. Take it out and just jump right into what you're telling us. Make sure that you clearly state what you're going to talk about for that whole point in a general enough way that you can then put in your examples to come support it. For your evidence, explanation, or examples, that's going to consist of, for you, either quotes or paraphrase. We are responding to a specific text, so we're constantly going to be referring back to that text. So since we're reading Outliers, we're going to be referring to things that Gladwell says and saying, hey, Gladwell makes this point, Gladwell argues. And I'm going to show you some templates for introducing authors' ideas about that as well. So you can also use paraphrasing, which is where you're rephrasing what they say, but still giving them credit. Gladwell says, and then you explain it in your own words, is just as fine a way of using evidence or examples, as long as you are changing his words enough so that you're not exactly quoting him, but without using quotation marks. That's the danger. We want to either exactly quote and use quotation marks, or we want to change their ideas enough that we put it in our own words, and then that's when we can take the quotation marks away, and that's called paraphrasing. So quotes or paraphrase for your evidence. Then for your analysis, this is the part where you talk about who cares? What does it mean? So an author's point cannot just stand on its own. You're going to learn about this in chapter 3 of They Say, I Say, about hit and run quoting, which is where you just kind of throw a quote out there and then don't explain what you meant by it at all. So we always want to be referring back to our main idea, to our larger argument, which of course it's also referring back to our thesis, which is the larger idea of our whole paper. So when we get down to the analysis part, what our real job is explaining how does the evidence or explanation that we provided help to back up the larger argument that we're making. So you need to explain that in a few sentences. And then your final piece of your meal plan is going to be your link or transition. So here it says that you're linking back to the paper's thesis. So you kind of have two options. You can either link back to the thesis and say, this is how I'm explaining this larger point to you, or you can link into the next paragraph by saying, this point is helpful in understanding our larger argument, but also we need to look at this point. So you're leading into the next kind of idea that you want to talk about. Let me show you a specific example of what this meal plan paragraph will look like. So I have this highlighted by color. This is your M, and you'll notice that it's more than 4 things, right? So your meal plan paragraph is not 1 sentence per letter. You're gonna maybe have more sentences, and it sometimes goes like MEAEAL, which is what this paragraph does. So we have our main idea. This was a student's writing from last year's class in response to a paper that I gave them. So their main point is, one reason why I agree with Alexander's point of view is because of how the criminal justice system is biased and discriminatory to African Americans. So our author has already introduced Alexander's point of view in their introduction, okay, which is something you will have done as well. You will have already introduced Gladwell's main ideas so that you can say something like this. And you're saying, I agree with this point for these reasons. Now, we're going to get an example of what thing the author says that our writer is agreeing with. Alexander states in her article, to try and control the war on drugs, they took away our right to the Fourth Amendment, which was protection against unreasonable search and seizure. But stop and frisk operations became routine in poor communities filled with African Americans. So here is our quote, but we haven't yet explained it. So let's see what our author says about it. This goes to show that even though crime is prevalent in almost every community, law enforcement and the criminal justice system target more African Americans than any other race, which means that there end up being a disproportionate number of Blacks in the criminal justice system. So this is our author kind of explaining the quote that they gave us so that we can understand it in the context of what they're trying to explain. Our author goes on to give us another example that backs up their larger argument. So here's this MEAEAL thing you're going to see sometimes and create sometimes. So she says, she goes on to explain, once you're labeled a felon, depending on the state you're in, the old forms of discrimination, denial of the rights to vote, and exclusion from jury service are suddenly legal. She explains how ex-offenders are ineligible for food stamps and most are unable to get jobs due to their criminal history. She also says that during the drug war peak, most of the arrests were from possession of marijuana, even though studies show that people of all races used and sold illegal drugs at just about the same rate. Jails were overflowing with predominantly African Americans. So in this example, we get like several different things that the author says. And then our writer's going to break them down for us a little bit. So we get a quote here, and then afterwards we get some paraphrase. So it's okay to mix those. Then we get our explanation. This supports her argument. This is a great way to start your explanation or analysis part of your paragraph. This supports her argument that there is disproportionate discrimination against Blacks, because if neighborhoods were policed equally, there would be a more proportionate representation of races being arrested. So this is our author's explanation of the examples that they gave. Now we're going to move into the final part of the paragraph, which is our link, transition, conclusion. These points help elucidate how biased the criminal justice system is by showing how rights are specifically revoked from certain communities and not from others. So this brings us back to our main argument about how the criminal justice system is biased. They've restated what they said, but without using the same exact words. So they're kind of making their point again and bringing us back to where we started and getting us ready to move on to the next point, okay? I hope this video has been helpful. Please ask me any questions if you have them, and I will post those docs and this example paragraph for you guys to refer to if you need. All right, good luck.